Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is Ukraine War news update, first part thereof for the 7th of December 2023. Let's get to where we normally start. Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before, all the usual caveats apply. That you can find them in the description to the video below. And what we have is another pretty heavy day for Russian losses in a number of categories. Personnel 1,120 is still high, still a really high figure, and that shows that there are a number of places along the front lines where, well, realistically, where the Russians are attacking. I think most of the Russian personnel losses these days are incurred from their own very expensive attacks. 18 tanks, 26 APVs and 21 artillery systems across those three categories they are high numbers. 18 tanks is, yeah, that's a bad day of tank losses there for sure, and 26 APVs, of course. 33 drones and 1 cruise missile. I often just skirt over those numbers because they refer oftentimes to the previous night. 29 vehicles and fuel tanks and 3 pieces of special equipment. Fairly average, although, well, I say fairly average. 30 vehicles and fuel tanks is a high number of vehicles to lose in 24 hours, so that's logistics being hit. Now, I've got 2 Andrew Perpetua lists because I don't think I showed you one yesterday. It hadn't come out then. But anyway, just to show you yesterday's figures, not quite parity, but near a number of Ukrainian losses to Russian losses. ST-68 radar hit by a Lancet, piece of comms equipment. 3 boats and a Caesar and a Dana self-propelled gun. So that's fairly high value stuff. I can't speak to the boats, of course, and whether people were taken out in those. A number of BMP-1s, IFVs, so those are low-value IFVs and a couple of SUVs. But I would say, yeah, that's going to hurt in terms of losing a Caesar, a destroyed Caesar, and a damaged Dana self-propelled gun. That's not great. The Russians, on the other hand, have lost 2 Grads there, which will not be great for them. A couple of tanks, a few IFVs and APCs and whatnot, and then a whole load of civilian vehicles or logistics vehicles, really. So I think on balance, although the Russians have lost more than the Ukrainians, there's a couple of fairly high value pieces for the Ukrainians that they will rue missing. Then we have today's one, which goes back to being much more in favor of the Ukrainians. That's possibly 4-to-1 ratio, maybe 3 or 4-to-1 ratio there. If we look at what the Ukrainians have lost, another boat involved there, surveillance and camera equipment again, M777 howitzer, BM21 Grad multiple launch rocket system, and other than that, sort of fairly normal stuff. If you go to the Russian losses, we have a Mi-8 helicopter that's damaged, and I'll show you that. 3 boats there, actually, so you can have that boat. We have a couple of bits of artillery, a number of tanks, T-80s, and then 4 unknown tanks. Number of IFVs as well of differing types. More recent BMP 3s and 2s, only 1 BMP 1 there, which goes into the figures analysis we did on BMPs some time back. APCs, that just to remind you that they appear to be using fewer BMP 1s, that they've got most of those out of storage. Now that they're going to have to be rebuilding BMPs, the ones in storage that are not in good nick, you might as well fully rebuild the later BMP 2s and 3s rather than fully rebuild BMP 1s. So I think that means that the BMP 1 stocks have, or at least the easy stocks have been exhausted. So you're starting to see more of the recent BMPs being used. NTLB APCs there, number of those, and then some civilian stuff as well. So I think that is a much heavier day for the Russians than the Ukrainians. Okay, going to look at a few other sources to do with losses. More than 100,000 prisoners have been sent from Russian prisons to fight in Ukraine since the start of the full-scale invasion, according to Vladimir Osechkin, the founder of Gulagu.net project, who received it from source in the federal service for the execution of punishment. Osechkin's figures were confirmed by Olga Romanova, executive director of the Sitting Imprisoned Russian movement, who, citing her own data, said that 120,000 prisoners were sent to the front in Ukraine. When you're talking about crypto or klepto mobilization, I think Russia have been pretty successful. They have been able to gather an awful lot of people from pretty disparate situations, from Eastern Ukraine offering social mobility by signing up to the army. From abroad, we've seen the Nepalese have now shut down or arrested a bunch of people involved in human trafficking. The same in Cuba. So there are people coming from abroad to fight for the Russians, but also, or mainly, they've been going to the prisons. And if you can get 120,000 prisoners or 100,000 prisoners from your prison network, then one, you are getting really high levels of mobilization, which is significant, and two, you're actually saving an awful lot of money on the prison budget. I wonder basically whether there is a benefit. I mean, it sounds awful, right? But from a really calculated point of view, that you're not paying for 120,000 prisoners to be fed, to be, scare quotes, rehabilitated. I don't think they were particularly concentrating on that. You're probably saving money on prison officers who are losing their jobs, and maybe they're signing up for the army as well. I don't know. Goodness. But anyway, that's a ramification for that kind of project. According to Asechkin's data, more than 1,000 convicts per week die at the front lines. According to British Defence Ministry intelligence estimates, prisoners may account for as many as 40,000 wounded and 20,000 killed out of the 290 to 350,000 total losses of the Russian army so far. And of course, with the prisoners, there'll be less kickback when they're lost. They're probably not having to pay compensation. There are all sorts of benefits to the Russians being able to hoik prisoners out of prison, promise them freedom, which is kind of an easy thing. It doesn't cost the Russians, at least up front, right? If you die, you die. But if you survive for 6 months, you get freedom. We're not going to pay you anything. There's no compensation to your family if you die, but you do get freedom. And that freedom doesn't cost you, unless, of course, there's crimes and you have to, there are ramifications going on from that, law of unintended consequences. But you can see that as a fairly sensible thing for the Russians to do. Now, here is some footage. It's not great footage, although Status 6 has extraordinary video of a Russian Mi-8 helicopter that landed in a field, and then it was targeted with HIMARS fired by the Ukrainians. Quite a target of opportunity. The extent of damage cannot be fully concluded from the video. One Gilmer's rocket is seen impacting close to the helicopter, making it plausible to believe that the helicopter won't be able to take off on its own anytime soon. Unfortunately, there's no more knowledge after this, and the video isn't great. But what you have is this helicopter landing and being spotted by a drone, and this is the advantage of HIMARS, right? They can hit time-sensitive targets. Things like ATACMS as well. So this is the advantage over, say, a Storm Shadow cruise missile. You'd never use a Storm Shadow cruise missile to do this. But just to talk about different targets, you have a helicopter landing in a field, and you've got a drone operator saying, bloody hell, I've just seen a Mi-8 at these coordinates. Can someone hit that Mi-8? And the only thing that's realistically going to do that, if it's within range, is going to be a guided multiple launch rocket, guided rocket. To get that helicopter is only going to be there for however long. So to get a cruise missile up in the air to hit that, it's the wrong kind of weaponry. But it's not. It takes hours to get those kind of missions going. So as you can see, the helicopter is there. HIMARS hits really close to it over here. Now, even though it won't be a direct hit, and we don't really know, you can't really work out what's happened there. The tungsten ball bearings and fragments and the earth and stones and rock from the ground that will be thrown up around the area would probably, if depending on exactly what Gimler's munition it was, will probably render that unusable as a helicopter. So that is why that is now in Andrew Perpetua's stats, as we saw, and that is a good hit there. That is a good reactive hit. For that Mi-8 to be taken out. Okay, Russian sources state that both pilots died in yesterday's AFU downing of the Su-24M using a, quote, mysterious air defense system. The enemy, quote, the enemy shot down our Su-24M from an incomprehensible but long-range air defense system. Now other planes are under threat. I don't know. I suggested it was a Patriot. There's talk about how Odessa is getting tooled up with air defense. Don't know it's a Patriot. It could well be. Some people are saying that there are patrol boats in the area that are being used for the grain corridor that almost certainly have some kind of air defense on them. Because after all, you're not going to be protecting those boats from other ships coming along and attacking. So why would you have those patrol boats? It will be to protect things from the air. We confirmed that the information that on Tuesday, December the 5th, our Su-24M, so this is a Russian bomber, was shot down over the Black Sea. According to sources, both pilots were killed. Colleagues write the plane was shot down from the Patriot system, which allegedly appeared in the Odessa area. That's what I said. Our source in the VKS says that this version is not the only one, or this theory. The enemy has some kind of incomprehensible but very similar long-range air defense system. Maybe it's Patriot, but I'm not sure. The bad thing is that now our aircraft that strike at the enemy are in great danger, and we don't even know what the Ukrainians were shooting from yet, the source says. Good news for the Ukrainians, especially since that there will be 2 crew members. They take a long time to train. A lot of effort goes into training these pilots. So if they go down with a plane, that's arguably a greater problem for the Russians than losing the plane itself. The Ukrainians have also destroyed a launcher of the Russian S-300, the Vychyad's air defense system. That is a decent strike as well. I mean, the S-350, I think, is somewhere between the S-300 and S-400. So it's a decent enough system. Been in service since 2019, so relatively new. Operational range against aircraft up to 120 kilometers, and against ballistic missiles 30 kilometers. And whether it can be used in the ground-to-ground mode, I don't know. But that will be a useful target taken down. Now, talking about that, here we have P-Star-11 saying, Sternenko, one of the many Ukrainians spearheading FPV drones efforts, hints that the next target for FPV drone might be a helicopter. So after the destruction by an FPV drone of a Russian Tor M2 system, around $30 million worth of equipment in early November, someone asked what was next. He replied, S-300, S-400. Today, an S-350, which is worth about $135 million, was destroyed by an FPV drone. Now he replied helicopter to the same question asked by the same user. Interestingly, the S-350 was destroyed yesterday after Ukrainians shot down the Russian Su-24M over the Black Sea. A few months ago, a Ukrainian FPV drone tried to hit a Russian helicopter without success. So I showed you that, I think, a drone getting near to a helicopter, obviously it's not really going to have a chance of capturing it. But I talked about whether you could have an air-to-air drone, basically. So if helicopters are operating in a certain area, get a fairly sizable drone up that can maybe shoot some short. I mean, the British were touting a drone recently, weren't they? That I think might be on the way to Ukraine at some point. That could take surface-to-air missiles, not surface air-to-air missiles. I'm pretty sure I've done so much content now that everything's a bit of a blur. I'm fairly sure there's a British drone that was showing that, and that would be perfect. So if they've got them there, and I know I know a few people in areas. I know that people are working on tech all the time, like submarine drones. I know are top of the agenda at the moment. Working on, submersible to a couple of kilometers. So there's a lot of work going. I know some people are saying you get some people on Twitter and whatnot saying, Trent Telenko's a big fan of this, where he slags off the US military, saying they're not reacting, they're not, the American army would be useless at the moment because they're not doing. People are working on stuff. Don't think that people aren't. They're looking at this war and they're going, right, we need this. I know this because I and you go to the defense exhibitions and it's all about drones. My mate was there recently to the big one in London, but to do with his business, and he was like, drones, all about every conceivable type of drone with every conceivable capability is there. So, people are taking note and the militaries will be reacting. You can bet your bottom dollar. But take the UK defence industry, where there are also these big projects that are rumbling on that you put long-term money into. And this goes back to the idea that, so there's some theories that, and there was a really good discussion about this on Andrew Perpetua's live stream a couple of weeks ago with CJ and John Ridge and a bunch of experts. They're saying that you get these conspiracy theories that this war is being sort of motivated by the defense industries. Defense industries want war. There's profit in war, which there is, right? But it's saying it's a bit of a myth, because what happens is in war you ramp up production of stuff, and the margins on the production of stuff is not as big as the margins on big projects. So when you have we need the F-35, right? Okay, and you kind of sort that out in peacetime, and that's a project that makes gazillions of spondoolies. Creating 155mm shells, it does make money, but it's not in the same region as an F-35 project that spirals and spirals and spirals, right? So for the UK, it's these procurement efforts for major big drones like the Reaper, because they were the big thing. So we're like, right, this is kind of peacetime now. Let's put all these billions of pounds into this drone project. And it's like, this war comes along, it's like, oh yeah, no, that's the wrong type of drone. But the big money it happens actually in peacetime with those big procurement, with those big R&D projects, rather than the procurement of actual stuff to use on the battlefields. Anyway, that's a bit of a sidebar. Get on with it, Pierce. Right. A collaborator was blown up in the center of Luhansk. Oleg Popov, a deputy of the LPR People's Council, was wounded as a result of the car bombing. So that was one thing, but then a more successful assassination here of someone that's seen as a traitor. So he is reported on Russian and Ukrainian channels that a famous traitor, ex-Rada deputy Ilya Kiva, was found dead in Moscow. So deputy parliament leader in Ukraine. Kiva ran from Ukraine on the eve of the full-scale invasion. He attended many talk shows on Russian TV recently where he slandered Ukraine. And so both Ukrainian and Russian media reporting that. It's thought that the operation was SBU. According to preliminary data, Kiva was killed by small arms fire. In fact, he was wounded by a shot and then killed by a second shot, as far as I can understand. Oh yeah, here it is coming. In January 2022, he left Ukraine and later ended up in Moscow. He supported the beginning of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, actively participated in Russian propaganda, and on March 15th last year, he was deprived of his mandate following comments in support of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The body of Ilya Kiva was discovered this afternoon around 3 p.m. A hotel employee found him. Kiva was lying on his stomach with his face in the snow, and there was a large pool of blood around him, according to Russian media. So that has happened. He has been removed from the world. Moving on to strikes, distant strikes here. Last night, a total of 18 Shahed drones were launched towards Ukraine, of which 15 were shot down. So it's pretty good interception rate. Again, don't really know about the 3 that did get through. Now, this I find to be a fascinating infographic. So this is showing the most popular Shahed drone routes from September the 6th to November the 3rd. And usually they fly on a route to Starokonstantinev and Khmelnytsky. These are areas of air bases. So basically, although they are trying to sound out air defense systems here and there are an awful lot that fly to those air bases further back into Ukraine. You can see the occasional sort of dog legs here and there from drones that try and sort of fool the air defenses and do these kind of interesting patterns circling. I wonder if that's not Kiev, is it? So Kiev's around there, I think. So, there's a few odd movements, but certainly more recently, it looks like Kiev has been abandoned as a place for Shahed drones to attack. They haven't had, and that's probably they found that out before September, where Kiev was looking like the air defenses are too solid there, and they're going for other places, and particularly these military targets back towards the west. So yeah, I thought that was a pretty interesting infographic. Odessa Oblast Governor Ole Kiper reported that the Danube port infrastructure in Ismail was attacked, killing a van driver near a warehouse. So these are the strikes down here. You can see there's quite a bit of activity in this Odessa area, general Odessa area. You've got Odessa, and then down on the border you've got, here's the Danube River, and you've got Ismail back here and Reni as well. So some activity there. Ukrenegro or Ukrenego, the Ukrainian power company or the government agency, stated the power plant is still operating despite 3 Russian strikes. So Russian forces launched 3 overnight strikes against a thermal power plant in one of Ukraine's eastern oblasts, but failed to halt its operations, according to Ukrenego on the 6th. So that's yesterday. There is one that's been targeted. I mean, that says 3 overnight strikes. That might well be the one that's been targeted 6 times over the last week or so. So it is still operational, and that is testament to the work that the Ukrainians have put in to being, first of all, really reactive, but probably also proactive in defending these places too, based on what they learnt from last year's autumn and winter attack on the Ukrainian energy infrastructure. Right. David D here says, this is not news, but it's quite ironic. So right now, he says, 2 Patriot batteries are providing coverage for all of Ukraine today. That may well be 3, may well even be more, I don't know, but say 2. At the same time, at least 4 Patriot batteries manned by a US Air Defense unit out of Fort Bliss in Texas are deployed to the UAE. So the UAE is where Putin is right now. Putin has gone to visit UAE and Saudi Arabia. So that means that the US Army have more than twice as many Patriot batteries protecting Putin than there are Patriot batteries in Ukraine. That's an ironic twist. No one respects the US anymore, he says. Well, that's a bit harsh, but he is former US Army, I believe. So, yeah, he's not happy about that. Talking about strikes, again, we got a strike on Donetsk. Donetsk is close to Ukrainian lines. Obviously, Avdiivka right on its doorstep does get routinely hammered. This is quite a significant hit that took place yesterday afternoon. There's various footage coming out of this. There's a lot of smoke. Some people saying it's a major ammunition dump that was hit. I think Reporting for Ukraine says that. Other people saying it's actually a fuel depot, an oil depot. No report says it was reported that an oil depot and a repair plant were hit, and that explosions are still ongoing. That was nighttime. This was after the heavy arrivals are reported in the Lenininsky district, occupied Donetsk. Smoke rises. I don't know. It's pretty thick black smoke. It could well be an oil depot. It could well be an ammunition depot as well. It could be several places hit in Donetsk. So who knows? Explosions being reported in Skadovsk. Again, that's in the occupied Kherson Oblast. Increasingly, Russia moved their equipment there as Ukraine's firing range moved further and further into Russian territories. And then I think they're finding it difficult to maintain stuff there now. It's still an important staging post from Crimea. So it's sort of between Crimea and Dnipro River. Right. Also reported, and this is kind of going on now, that Crimea has there is an explosion in Sevastopol in Crimea at the moment. We'll keep an eye on that, see if anything is hit. There's been quite a lot of explosions that have taken place over the last few weeks in occupied territories that we don't hear any information about. So I think footage used to come out a lot more easily from occupied areas, and it is not so easy to come by these days. In the same way, that footage, I say, is very hard to gain concerning strikes inside Ukraine because of the laws they have in place and the kind of operational security and whatnot. Whenever there are these Shahed drone attacks, and a number of them aren't taken out by air defenses, where have they gone? What have they hit? And we just don't know because the Ukraine has done a good job of shutting that down. Well, I just get a sense that the Russians are shutting down some of that footage as well, because there are hits that take place an awful lot. We're just not hearing about them. A monument to the hero of Ukraine, Alexander Matsievsky. So if you remember the guy it was a war crime, another blatant war crime caught on camera. where he was standing there smoking a cigarette, and the Russians said something to him, and then he said "Slava Ukraini," and they shot him, and it was horrific, horrible. And they've made a statue of him, and it's an incredible statue. It's like Madame Tussauds. A monument to the hero of Ukraine was opened in Kiev. Matsievsky was brutally executed by Russian soldiers during the Battle of Bakhmut after he said the famous words "Slava Ukraini." And they were standing in his. Except I think they have made his clothing a lot cleaner than it was. I mean, he was on the back end of fighting in the forest, and he was very muddy clothing and looked pretty dishevelled. But that's an incredible likeness. It really is. Just a bit of artistic quality there. In case you're wondering what the Russians are planning, again, they are saying it very openly here. So, quote, "We definitely need Mykolaiv and Odessa regions. This is mandatory in order to discourage NATO and the West from accepting Ukraine into NATO," Russian Army General, ex-Interior Minister of Russia, has said. "These are Russia's real goals, not Putin blabbing about protecting the people, genocide and destruction," says Anton Gerashchenko. So, yeah, I mean, he says it here. We definitely need Mykolaiv and Odessa regions. This is mandatory in order to discourage NATO and the West from accepting Ukraine into NATO. This is, I mean, just to remind you where that is. I have to go to map of Ukraine. I didn't have ready, but nonetheless, let's have it here. Oh goodness, this is all a bit rubbish. Where's my map? Feels good to have you back, Mappy. Right, so this is to say that the Russians are definitely keen on, well, not just keen on this is obligatory for them. They need to take this area. They need to take Odessa, Mykolaiv, and that gives them the full land corridor, and it also shuts off Ukraine's ability to make any money, to export any grain. So it's a kind of zero-sum gain. You know, Russia's gain is Ukraine's loss here, but also it just allows a proper defense of Crimea, allows them to keep hold of Crimea and not have it hit by distance munitions. So this is part of the Sevastopol as a deep sea warm water port objective that they have. This is super important. So the Russians need to get this. Now, the problem with that approach is that how long have Russia taken to secure Bakhmut, I wonder? You know, quite a long time. I mean, what are their chances of taking all of that area? It's just insane. But anyway, that is what they want. So I would say that's their minimum. You can talk about the maximalist approach to taking hold of Ukraine. That ain't ever going to happen. So they're I think, putting a lot of store in that objective. Right, adding to what we've seen over the last week, in fact, it's now the 7th failure in a week. Russian media report that the engine of a cargo Tu-204 plane caught fire during takeoff in Ulan-Ude. The plane dumped fuel and managed to land. So, I mean, it luckily got away with it, but that is another civil aviation nightmare for the Russians, and one must assume it's to do with sanctions hammering the ability to safely fly. Russia is to hold presidential elections on March the 17th. Well, we kind of knew that, but it's now been ratified by the upper house of parliament in the Federation Council. It is set for March 17th, and Putin is almost certainly going to run. Vladimir Putin, he's been in power since 1999 as either president or prime minister, has not yet officially announced his candidacy. However, he's broadly expected to run. He's been in power for 25 years. How much has Russia improved, particularly over the last 10 years? How much has a lot of the Russian people in the eastern provinces, how about that access to gas to their homes, to sewage to their homes, to, you know, what's the welfare state looking like? It's just a bit of a nightmare. So however, he has such a strong control over the narrative and internal security that, you know, there ain't nothing anyone can do about that. So he will be president, no doubt, again, and probably until he dies. Anyway, thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. I really appreciate all your support. Take care. Toodle pits. I'll be with you soon.